Because in this text is summed up exactly the purpose and the means that God is using to achieve that purpose in you for His own glory. That God has called you to bear fruit. And you can bear fruit. You will bear fruit. He has called you to stand in His presence, clean and without spot. Jesus Christ did not shed His blood for you so that the very first thing you see when you walk into glory is a scowl on His face because of all your failures. I want you, well, let me put it this way. As a servant of Christ, I will not have you condemned. As a representative of Jesus Christ, I will not tolerate a believer walking in condemnation. Why? Because of what Christ has done. There is a true humility in Christianity, a true humility. There is a true recognition of our sin, a true brokenness, a true repentance, but it is not unto death. It is not unto defeat. It does not drive a believer to wallowing in some mire. He says, I am the true vine. As opposed to what? You see, we have an opposition here. Now, if he'd have said, I am a vine, the world wouldn't have a problem with him. Even if he said, I am the vine. But he says, I am the true vine. And here he is drawing a contrast. You see that? A great contrast. Jesus is telling us there's a bunch of vines out there that aren't true. You have found many of them, haven't you? You may be, even right now, tangled up in a whole bunch of them. Always looking for fruit, always looking for life, always looking for meaning. You will not find it in any vine except Jesus Christ. And that's what's so dangerous about Western evangelicalism. They're giving you more than Jesus. They're giving you entertainment. They're giving you seminars. They're teaching you how to do things right, how to get your best life now. All sorts of things so that you think you're being filled, but you're being filled with things that cannot fill. You're being deceived. You need to be left alone. You need to be given Christ. And you need to learn to feed from Him. He says, I am the true vine. Now, in the earlier part of the service, in the prayer service, Anthony read from Isaiah 5. We could also read from Psalms 80, because there's something very important that we see there. When Jesus says, I am the true vine, His Jewish listeners were understanding something that maybe we wouldn't understand. You see, in Isaiah, we are told that God went to Egypt and He brought out a vine. That vine was Israel. And He did absolutely everything imaginable for Israel to prosper as a vine. But in the end, we see in Isaiah and we see in Psalms 80, in the end, what happens? The vine is destroyed. And it's destroyed not just by opposing forces, but the vine is destroyed by God. And there's some things that we can learn, many things, but we're not going to touch them today. There are some things that we can learn from this. One of the great hindrances in our lives are counterfeit cisterns. Things that are brought into our life that hold no water, cannot quench our thirst. They're like mirages that will dry up. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Even good things that are a gift from God can be nothing but mirages if seen outside of His presence and His will. Let me give you a couple. Children, marriage, a good job. They can all be temptations to do what? Turn your eyes from Jesus. Blessings, health. I'm not saying these things are bad. These things are wonderful. I have some of them, and I am glad. They can be temptations. That is why you will see, and Jowett points this out very good in his little book, School of Calvary. It seems that It requires a greater degree of suffering to bring a man to a greater degree of the presence of Christ. Because we are somewhat hard-headed and calloused. And the good things, even the gifts, can become things that we think of more than the giver. Listen to Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 11 through 13. Has a nation changed gods when they were not gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Be appalled, O heavens, at this, and shudder. Be very desolate, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Now, even though this appears in Jeremiah in this exact form, only here, we see this tendency always, don't we? We see it in the garden. We see it even in God dealing with Egypt, showing His mighty power. We see it in Israel. We see it in the wilderness. We see it in the land of Canaan. We see it in the days of the prophets. We see it in our own lives. We have a tendency to seek out things other than God. And I think that the reason for that is the reason why we have the admonition in the book of Colossians chapter 3. That we need to keep focusing on things above where Christ is seated. The problem is, even though we have been renewed in our spirit, we have been regenerated, we are still physical beings who long to touch, long to see with the eyes. I am convinced that the men and women who have made the most progress in the Christian life have been those who have seen more of the other world. Now, I don't necessarily mean dreams or visions. I just mean that they have a deeper sense of what is to come. They've caught the apocalyptic vision of the prophets of the Old Testament that saw lambs lying down with lions. That some of the believers that have been most fruitful since the ascension of Jesus Christ were people who experienced extraordinary difficulties, extraordinary problems, or in themselves had extraordinary weakness. Why do we kick against the Scriptures and say that they say something they do not say? Let me give you an example. I'm going to give you a word, and then you just envision in your mind, what do you see when I give you this word? Samson. You think of an Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Jewish Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, if that was the case, then how is it that the Philistines didn't know where his power came from? He was probably just like an rural agricultural guy in Peru, probably about this tall with really thin, sinewy arms. Where does he get his strength? I don't care how many muscles you have, you can't pull up the gate of a city, carry it on your back up a hill and throw it down. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that, but physiologically it's impossible. He didn't do it by muscles, he did it by the power of the Spirit. Paul the Apostle. I'm so tired of going to conferences on Paul the Apostle, his mighty intellect, his this, his that. Everything they talk about is the very thing he doesn't talk about. He talks about his weakness. When God made him weak, God turned him over so that he feared for his life every moment. He was basically all his life, Christian life, in the mouth of the lion. Why? So that his confidence wouldn't be in himself, but in He who raises the dead. You know, Spurgeon, it's my favorite preacher. But boy, when a lot of these biographers get to heaven, Spurgeon's probably going to punch them. Because they talk about Spurgeon's intellect. They talk about his great photographic memory and all these different things. Spurgeon would have talked about his weakness. Your weakness is a catalyst to push you to grab harder onto Christ so that you might be filled.